The myth of action, how to improve efficiency and effectiveness in automotive repairs. Join passionate automotive trainer and coach Andrew Uglow as he debunks the myth that simply being busy equates to effectiveness. We'll explore the importance of correct action and how technicians can improve their problem-solving skills through structured thinking and diagnostic strategies. I'm your host, Anthony Pearl, and this is the Frictionless Workshop podcast. Let's get cranking. Andrew, let's get into myth number 2 here. I think this is an important one. Action equals effectiveness.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? Just because I'm doing stuff, that means I'm being effective.
And didn't that carry us through school?
Oh, absolutely.
Where we pretended to be doing stuff and therefore we looked effective and we were the quiet ones studiously doing things when we might have been quietly listening to the scores in the cricket?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember as an apprentice, as a first-year apprentice, like at second or third week on the job, one of the senior techs has come up to me and he's gone, whatever you do, don't look like you're doing nothing. And I said, what do you mean? And he says, if you've got to pace up and down with a blank sheet of paper, checking boxes or pretending to count things, you do that, because if they see you doing nothing, they'll give you something awful to do. And so it was all about, it was not about the work, it was about looking like you were doing the work. And so this myth is held by technicians. And it's sort of like a cause and effect. This true myth, I guess, is held by technicians. And the tiny distinction is that correct action equals effectiveness, not action, not any action. Correct action equals effectiveness. And effectiveness requires sound strategies and sound tactics in order to be correct. And it comes about from this whole, I call it the rush. And it's not like the rush of throwing yourself off a bridge with a parachute. It's not that sort of rush. It's the urgency. Hurry up, faster, how much longer, customers waiting, why isn't it done yet? Next car, faster, more. Are we done yet? That whole time pressure, that whole time urgency. And as a result of this, it generates a response that, because technicians have to justify their time, right? You were clocked in this job for an hour and a half. It's only a 45-minute job. What were you doing for the other 45 minutes? Like, there is accountability. Those questions get asked. It certainly get asked in any sort of good workshop anyway. And so you have to be able to justify what you're doing in order to answer that question, right? Oh, well, I had a broken start and I had this and I had that. And, there's all these processes that you need to follow as a way of justifying your time. And so that generates this need to be busy, this need to be doing something, not standing around scratching things. And so as a result of this, when technicians get into a point of overwhelm, and whether they're technicians or apprentices or foremen or whatever, they just go back to busy. They go back to just doing something in the hope that it will either get them unstuck or be enough that they can justify their time, whichever the case may be. And so that doesn't serve anyone. It certainly doesn't serve the customer. It doesn't serve the business. It certainly doesn't serve the technician. But it's what we accept. And I didn't realize that this was a thing until recently. We were doing some diagnostic training with a group of technicians. And I started to notice this behavior. And I've just gone, oh, well, that's really interesting. I've never seen that before. I wonder what purpose that's serving. And so with the diagnostic class, we run it for a manufacturer. And we use a discovery learning model. I'm not sure if people are familiar with discovery learning.
Well, explain it. I think that's the best way to say it, because I can't answer for everybody that's listening here today.
For sure. So often with training, here's the information we're going to learn. Here's the information, right? Take that information back to your dealership. High five, yep, we've done training, which is not inherently wrong. It's not inherently right either. But discovery learning is we want to put people into as close to a real life situation as we can manage. And then we want to get them to a point of overwhelm where the resources that they have, and particularly in this context of diagnosis, get them to a point of overwhelm where the resources that they have are not sufficient. And let's see what comes to the fore. Let's see how they operate. And then now that they've got to that point of overwhelm and stuck, right, now let's start to install into them some new ways of doing things and then give them another fault. And as they discover these things, we then give them another fault and another fault and another fault. And they get to practice the new way of thinking, not just the way of doing, which is what we've traditionally done in the past. And so this pattern of do something showed up quite clearly when they got stuck. They just started to do things. And we'd go and do a debrief on the diagnostics, like why were you doing this and why did you go here and what was your thinking behind that, and explain this course of action and this direction of diagnosis. And most of them couldn't. Oh, why are you doing that? I don't know. I was out of things to do and it seemed like the best thing to do at the time. And it's like, oh, okay. And so they didn't even realize that they'd got stuck. They'd actually got stuck long before they thought they had. Yeah. And it just resorted to this default, do something. You know, this whole action equals effectiveness or action equals efficiency, and it just simply doesn't. And so this is the conditioning that they had learnt. And so often to install new thinking, you have to dissolve the old thinking so as they're able to take this on.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we don't tend to teach people to pause.
Oh, no.
And to think. And, I was relaying this to you before we started, that I had some computer technical problems yesterday, and I was, doing exactly what you just described, where I went, right, I'm going to take some action, and I started unplugging and replugging things back in, and it's only when I actually stopped and paused and I went, that's not really going to achieve anything. The problem has got to be here. Let's just address the problem rather than trying to do something completely different to just feel like we're getting something done. And the getting something done, it actually then took me another 2 or 3 minutes to undo what I had done to try and fix the problem, and then go back to actually what really was the problem and resolve it.
Yeah, we see a similar sort of pattern in the technicians. It'll play out one of two ways. This action equals efficiency or action equals efficiency. It'll be just random stuff. They'll just go, I'll test this, I'll check that. And then there's no pattern, there's no logic, I'm just doing things because I feel I need to be doing things because someone's going to ask me, Andrew, what did you do on this car? And if I can give them a long list of things that I've done, it'll look like I'm not wasting time. The other, I call it the scorched earth diagnosis, where they start right back at the absolute basic of basics and incrementally move along all of the different possibilities as a way of eliminating things. And there's, again, both of these aren't inherently wrong, although the first one has some questions that need to be asked. But this scorched earth diagnosis is done because the problem they have is an information problem. They don't have a problem with the car. They have a problem with the information. And if they solve their information problem, they'll solve the problem in the car, but they don't know this. They're not taught this. They're taught what to do. They're taught what to do all the time from day dot in the automotive industry. Technicians are taught what to do. This is what you do. You do this, you do this. Here's your checklist. Here's your sheet. Here's your process. Here's your methodology. Do. They are not taught. And I feel like I'm harping on this, but they're not taught how to think. They're not taught how to think. I've never seen on a repair order, paused for 20 minutes, got myself a coffee, sat down in the workroom and drew out my own diagram to figure out what was really going on with the car. I've never seen anyone write that as a line item on the back of a job card and expect to get paid for it.
The Frictionless Workshop podcast is brought to you by Solutions Culture. For details on how to get in touch with Andrew, consult the show notes below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Now, back to the podcast. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I would imagine that a lot of the time what happens is people drive into the workshop and they say, I think this is broken, there's a leak here. But if going into, trying to attack the leak there may not be resolving where the problem is much higher up. And so unless you spend some time thinking about it, you're just going to be doing patchwork at best. In those kinds of scenarios. And it's funny how the difference is between this scenario and going to the GP. How often these days, particularly with the wonders of the internet, the people walk into the GP and say, Doctor, I think I've got this.
Dr.
And
Google.
Usually it's something way worse than what there is. And the doctors are trained to sit there and go, that's interesting. now with my medical experience, let me tell
Why
you
don't we
what we
check?
really have.
Why don't we check? Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things that drives this behavior is because the technicians are assessed on their performance, but they're only ever assessed on the performance after the fault is found. So the person doing the assessing has the benefit of hindsight that the technician didn't have at the time. And so someone will go, Andrew, why did you do this, this, and this? And I've gone, well, they were the best choices I had at the time. Or you shouldn't have done this, this, and this. You should have done that, that, and that, because that would have been more efficient. But I can't know that in the middle of doing the diagnosis. Those things weren't options for me because I couldn't see the end from the beginning. And so this is done, in some businesses, this is done really well. This is done really positively. And it's like, hey, if you'd use this approach or use that approach, we might have got a more efficient solution. But for the most part, it's done as a criticism. Andrew, you're a mouth breathing, knuckle dragging, forehead sloping peanut. You took too long. You should have done this, this, and this. What's wrong with you? And it's like, well, great that you've got the benefit of hindsight. Let's see you do the next one. The other thing is too that when technicians will get into overwhelm, that's a normal thing. Like that's just, if you're working on cars and you've got a problem car, unless you've seen it before, you're probably going to hit overwhelm. And different levels of skill hit overwhelm at different stages of diagnosis. And when they hit overwhelm, they have no strategy. They have no tools to reach for mentally that will facilitate them getting unstuck. And so this is the whole point of the pause, right? I need to step away. I need to give myself some space. I need to get to thinking about this, not just doing about this. Otherwise, I'm not going to solve my problem. And so the pivot or the solution to this myth, because ultimately that's what we're looking for, right? Like, okay, so my technicians suffer from this myth, this true myth of action equals efficiency, and perhaps I do too, because it's perpetuated by foreman, it's perpetuated by service management, it's perpetuated by all of the accountancy models, just faster product numbers on the line, get your stuff done. Learning to think resourcefully is just super critical. It's a skill that's not taught. I teach it. Shameless plug. I teach it. We have a program called the Resourceful Technician Formula, and it teaches technicians to think resourcefully. Who knew? And one of the benefits of this is that firstly, they recognize when they're stuck and they don't just start doing things as a way of trying to be effective or efficient. They go, right, I'm actually stuck. Now I have a strategy for getting unstuck. It teaches them how to think. And just as importantly, it teaches them how to do meta thinking, which is thinking about your thinking. And no one is teaching this. And the interesting thing is that, and I discovered this with the diagnostic class, is that you can't have a new way of thinking unless you have a framework to hang the thinking on. You need to have a structure to lay out your framework. And call out to Jem and Fraser if you're listening. Thank you very much for that tidbit of information. That was very useful. And so we call this framework, we call it the Resourceful Technician Formula, as I said. And it moves from the traditional what to do approach into a how to think approach. And again, it's thinking via strategically informed application of tactical heuristics. Now, I know we've mentioned heuristics before in the past, but heuristics are quick tests, quick effective ways of distilling really complex information down into its parts so that we can accurately understand what's going on and where we are in our process, because otherwise we just get busy. We don't know where we are and what we should be doing, so we just do more stuff and hope for the best. And that ultimately ends up in, well, I call it STDs, shopping trolley diagnosis. You just try one of these, try one of those, throw this part at it, and statistically you'll get it. Absolutely you will. You just might spend twice as much money than you would have normally, right? And if warranty's paying, well, who cares, right? Because money grows on the warranty, doesn't it? It's the magic tree that pays for everything. But if it's retail, that's going to be a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think the question here as well is, what can management do to encourage this? Because surely if they, is it as literal as creating a line item, a space for a line item for the pause and thinking about what actually is the problem and trying to think about that in a logical way and noting that down, that yes, we literally spent a couple of minutes mapping this out and working out that it is this problem. And sometimes it's going to be completely obvious, right? We need to change the filter, and that's pretty straightforward. And
It was
problem solved.
it was staring
And
me
so
in
it
the
was
face all along, and I
yeah,
couldn't see it.
look, and sometimes, and sometimes that line entry is going to be, took 30 seconds, we knew what the problem was,
Mhm.
and it was resolved. But other times it might be, we took 30 seconds, we thought that was the problem, then hang on, it didn't resolve the problem. We needed to create a new line entry for another pause to rethink what the problem might have been. And so actually doing that, I mean, is that literally what what workshop owners should be doing, is in actually having that encouraging that as a line
Oh,
item?
look, I think so. The two pieces of low hanging fruit are firstly, allow for the pause, like encourage that. Sometimes that distance in space between you and the problem, that ability to just to zoom out for a bit, to take a breath, clear your cache, so to speak, and to then start to spend a bit of time thinking about what's going on instead of doing stuff that you're supposed to do. I think is all the difference in the world. And the other one is how we frame the justification for technicians' actions. That needs to be done in a really positive way. That needs to change from being almost punitive to being really positive. Hey, look, Anthony, you did a cracking job on that car. Well done on finding that problem. How do you reckon you might find it faster next time? And have that discussion. Oh, well, if I tested for this and that in this sequence instead of the sequence I did, I'd have come across it quicker. Great. Now I've got more resources. Now, instead of, Anthony, you're a peanut, you took too long, it should have been an hour and you've done it an hour and a half, and just not good enough, Anthony, do better.
And isn't but what's really interesting now is with the technology that's around, if you take the time to do that and to map it out and to look at it, retrospectively as well, you can feed that information into AI tools that creates that database of knowledge, so that you can now go next time and say, this is what we know. What are the possible problems based on our collective knowledge as a workshop?
Oh, for sure. And there are scan tools now that you can buy that integrate AI specifically around that. As in, we know this particular car has this particular problem. A lot of the time you want to go and test here. And it'll give you the prompt to test for that earlier on in the process because it's more likely. And that's certainly useful, but I'm going to argue nothing beats thinking. Just relying on an AI, they've been known to hallucinate. They've been known
This is true.
to do all sorts of interesting things. And I'm not saying don't use it, but use it with intelligence. Use it with awareness of what's going on, because, yeah, you could.
Yeah, I was going to say that's true. True myth number 2B really is the side note is that the AI is always right. No, it's not.
Yeah, not yet.
No, don't think it will be. It's sort of it's another nah.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you for listening to the Frictionless Workshop podcast. For details on how to get Andrew working with you and your technicians, take a look at the show notes. There's also a link to some special content you can access. I'm Anthony Pearl, reminding you to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.